economic growth, improving livelihood, as well as preserving the health of the ocean. The green economy improves human well-being, such as decreasing environmental pollution, which improves the quality of our air, soil, and water.
But I think blue means for the tranquility water we have in Anguilla, which is the blue sea, and then this blue sky as usual. It's not always good, but it's good when it's good. Green represents the blue, the nice green trees that we have in Anguilla. It's not bad. I mean, it could be a little better, but you know how it is. Right now we use the sea for fishing, diving, you know, boat racing. I think the sea could use it a lot of things in general. But me personally, I like it how it is.
I believe a green economy tends to focus more on reducing environmental risks and creating sustainable developments while trying to not exhaust our natural resources. Whereas a blue economy would probably follow those same traits, but tend to be focused more on the oceans and their resources, our blue resources.
The use of renewable energy is within our reach.
Despite the coronavirus pandemic, the global solar industry had a record year. It added about 100 gigawatts of new capacity in 2020. And although developed countries led the charge to the solar power integration, for many years now, solar has been the cheapest form of new power in developing countries like Haiti and Africa, and made solar the single most important energy source of those developing countries. So we can see the solar uptake spanning from rich countries to poor countries. From a practical standpoint, I think the most cost-effective way of harnessing Anguilla's renewable energy potential is in the development of rooftop and ground-mounted solar energy plants. Depending on the situation, these projects can be ideal when you consider the installation and maintenance costs. But there are cases on the island where this is already being done. Private homes, supermarkets like Best Buy, resorts like Cuisine Art.
Rogers, Honorable Minister for Economic Development and Natural Resources, Mr. Kyle Hodge, Honorable Parliamentary Secretary, Mrs. Quincy Gomes-Marie, Honorable Leader of Opposition, Mrs. Cora Richardson Hodge. We bid you good afternoon and welcome to Straight Up Conversations. Straight Up Conversations is a forum where young people have the opportunity to directly engage officials of the government of Anguilla in dialogue to bring awareness to and/or address pressing matters faced by Anguilla's youth. This usually takes place at the second half of the National Conference on Youth and Development. And this year, our theme was optimizing the blue and green economy. On day one of the conference, we would have had a session where we launched the National Youth Policy and listened to a presentation by Dr. Henry Charles, and then had a Q&A session facilitated by the Chief Education Officer, Mr. Bren Romney. We also participated in our first panel discussion and heard presentations from the Sustainable Development Officer of the OECS, and representatives from the Fisheries and Agriculture Unit of the Department of Natural Resources. These presentations spoke to priorities and opportunities that exist for regional youth in the blue and green economy, and we also heard about what could be possible in the Anguillan context. The format of today's proceedings is essentially an open floor, another Q&A session where we, the young people of Anguilla, would like to get to know more about the plans that our elected officials have for us in key thematic areas, which we would start off with discussions on the blue and green economy, and then we will open the floor up a bit later for more general questions and other pressing matters from our listening audience and our audience in the room. Okay, so at this juncture, I will ask for all phones to be placed on silent or turned off so that we are not interrupted. And I will also open with the first question that we have prepared from one of yesterday's presentations. Okay, so if we look at the screen ahead, the question reads, what is the action plan for the Bang Task Force? Are there any regional or international partners associated with this initiative? And again, please feel free, if you believe this question is most relevant to your portfolio, you can go ahead and answer first, or work out amongst yourselves who would like to answer first. Okay?
Thank you for the question. The Bang Task Force was created earlier this year to look at blue initiatives, and Bang stands for Blue Anguilla. And what we started to do is to see how we can have an organized approach to how we deal with our blue natural capital, and ensure that as we look towards economic diversification, we do so in a more meaningful and sustainable way. The action plan for the task force. The task force is made up of a wide range of persons. That is 2 members from the Department of Natural Resources, 2 members from the Department of Infrastructure, that was micro and tourism, 1 member from energy, that is public utilities or maritime development, 1 member from public health, 1 member from tourism, 1 member from Anguilla's fisheries, 1 member from the Ministry of 1 member from the Ministry of Economic Development, and 1 member from the Anguilla Community College. So it's a very comprehensive cohort of persons that we put together so we can look at how do we optimize the opportunities available to us in terms of developing the economy, as well as how do we get our people ready and positioned to benefit from this work, because we wouldn't want to develop a space where the blue economy can thrive, but our people aren't prepared and we don't have the resources to prepare them. So Anguilla Community College played a key role in seeing how we can do this in a way that ensures that our people coming up can opt into it now, or even reframe the way they think of careers as it relates to the blue economy. So this Bang Task Force took off a bit like wildfire. We didn't expect some of the feedback that we got, or at least not at the pace that we did. But Anguilla is amongst the leaders of the region. Because of creating this, we were able to even leverage the Caribbean Development Loan by mentioning and showing them the work that we are doing for environmental sustainability by the creation of the Bang Task Force. Right now, one of our most exciting initiatives that we are considering is partnering with the Blue Belt program of the UK. That Blue Belt program was contentious when it first began because many persons felt like it was encroaching on waters that could otherwise be utilized for fishing. since then it has evolved into something more dynamic, and they have actually been referencing the Bank Task Force to prepare a package for all overseas territories from what Anguilla would have produced. So that's the way that we are moving and shaking at an international level. The Bank Task Force will also be heavily featured at COP26. In fact, I was just speaking with Melissa because I would have shared the video produced for Youth Week, the 15-minute long video that we were able to shoot last week. And it is, once she sends it to me, because I'm still waiting. Once she sends it to me, I will send it off to the COP26 team because I would have shared the YouTube link, and they're very excited to feature the work of Anguilla at that level, because it's very clear that Anguilla has made its mark, and it has been very intentional with how we intend to enter into the blue economy and diversifying our existing economy. But to just wrap up my response, I want to read the purpose of the bank to give more context to what it's intended to do. And the purpose is to harness economic growth opportunities for Anguilla from our marine resources, specifically economic benefits in the areas of fisheries, aquaculture, transport, tourism, agriculture, renewable energies, and ocean biotechnology or bioprosperity. The bank is also tasked with balancing economic benefits with sustainability for meeting the broader goals of growth, employment generation, equity, and wise use of principles for environmental sustainability in support of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. When you consider the Sustainable Development Goals, one of the conflicts that many scholars and persons with issues of the Sustainable Development Goals is that in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, it's really rooted in economic growth. And sometimes economic growth can be in direct conflict with the environment. So what we wanted to do is ensure that while we pursue opportunities of economic diversity, that we were very intentional in safeguarding the environment for future generations to come.
The oversight of not sharing apologies on behalf of the member for opposition, Mr. Jose Vanterpool. He deeply regrets not being able to be here with us today, but he did send his apologies and best wishes for today's proceedings. And I do believe that this was a great segue into the next question that I wanted to ask. But before I move into the next question, is there anything that anyone from the panel would like to add to Parliamentary Secretary's words? All right, so we do have a question from the audience, and it is kind of a tack on to the Bank Task Force question. We heard that you mentioned several agencies. Would it be beneficial for a member of one of the umbrella youth agencies to be a part of the task force? What is your take on this question? Thank you, audience member.
It definitely would be beneficial, and especially now as we're going into our implementation phase for the purpose of longevity and continuity, it will be beneficial. And I think one of the criticisms often is that we have aspirations and we don't involve youth-specific groups. I felt like we probably felt a little too comfortable in the fact that we were made up primarily by young persons to look outwards, but because of that question, I will ensure that as we are preparing our implementation plan, we look into ensuring that someone from a youth group that's already existing takes part from a youth perspective. Because even as I would have mentioned, COP26, there's questions of what sort of youth groups do you have that specifically focus on this. And they want to know that while government is leading the way, that we have youth groups who are willing and able and excited about the blue and green economy opportunities and will be able to take up the mantle. So for longevity purposes, we definitely will extend the invitation.
Excellent. Thank you. Is there anything anyone else would like to add, contribute? She did great, right. Do we have any more questions from the audience at this juncture? No? Okay, we can move on to the next prepared question. All right, so this one reads, beyond the Bang Task Force, what provisions are being made to combat climate change? Shall I bring you another bottle of water?
I was just speaking with Minister Hodge, and I said, well, we've done a lot of work in a short time with Bang, and we need Gang next, because we need the green economy to be moving ahead. But one of the things that we are looking at right now would be the natural capital assessment, where we look at what is the economic value of our natural resources. I think that's one of the major elements to provisions that we made to combat climate change, because we would be able to see growth or any reduction of our green resources, whether it is erosion or temperatures over a period of time, the lives of our reefs. Right now we are considering a coastal rehabilitation program, and that is to look at things like sand erosion, particularly at the eastern beaches of the island that are usually neglected because they're not necessarily reserved for tourism. So as a result, people don't look at their current state. And we also, in that process, realized that a lot of the reefs in the eastern side of the island are dying or dead. And that's one of our major concerns. So we are looking to see how we can combat that. One of the things that we were hoping to bid at Darwin this year, but we were not successful in getting it in on time because there was a lot of work that was necessary to get it done, is how we can use sargassum in a more meaningful way. Because when we think of climate change in our context, we have to realize that the climate change of the Americas, of the Americas and the climate change of the UK and climate change of China is not the same as climate change in Anguilla and in the region. In the region, we are looking at each other and they're almost a countdown clock in our heads because we don't know what will be the next effect of climate change. And so we have to be very intentional how we handle and interact with it. And a big part of how we respond to climate change is actually climate resiliency and climate adaptation. So we are doing a lot to create stronger structures to be able to withstand and respond to the elements of climate change, like increased temperatures and the effects it would have on our ecosystems, as well as the way we build, how we build our economy and how we can respond to shocks like storms. Because now we're realizing more than ever, we have to be able to switch the way we operate in order to respond to climate change events.
When we think about climate change, we think about the responsible use of energy, and more we are seeing the use of electric vehicles. And as young people in this room, I would encourage each and every one of you for your first vehicle to not be a gas guzzler, to not be one of those vehicles that you have to drive to the pump every week and put in $200 or $300. So when you think about climate change, you can make an impact. As small of an impact it is, you can make it. And if you've been listening to the House of Assembly over the past weeks and months, you would realize that we've taken motions to the House to allow duty-free concessions on specifically electric vehicles. You won't see any other vehicle, you won't see a motion taken to the House for any other vehicle but an electric vehicle. So this is just an encouragement for you young people listening via the stream and sitting right here, is that you save the environment when you go green, and you save dollars when you go green. So I just wanted to add with that. Well, that's not worry, but if you're concerned, obviously about the gas prices, then it would be good to invest in an electric vehicle.
I just say, just to add to that in relation to tackling climate change. Can you hear me? Because we live in the Caribbean belt, we know that a lot of the impacts and causes of climate change are outside of our control. And by that I mean we are usually the recipients of environmental degradation elsewhere, or pollution or improper use of the environment. But one part of the Caribbean and Anguilla's strategy in terms of tackling climate change is to lend our voices to regional organizations that are advocating for responsible use of the climate by bigger countries that actually do have an impact, and their approaches to tackling climate change have a material impact on the way we are impacted here in the Caribbean region and in Anguilla specifically. So that is another part to the approach in tackling climate change, and a major part because, of course, we do not control all aspects of climate change. And regional institutions like the University of the West Indies Research Center, they do a lot of research on climate change, and they have been working with regional governments to equip us with more information so that we can actively and effectively lend our voices to advocating for countries like the US and the UK to be more responsible with climate change action.
Thank you. Is there anything else that we would like to add from the officials panel?
Sure, I would like to answer the young lady's question over there about the price of fuel going up, because I know that is a concern and don't want us to leave here with any misconceptions, because they say the children will lead, and so that extends to the youth also. The fuel prices started going up because there was a big ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal and nothing could pass, and so the prices and access to fuel at that time was diminished, and so the prices started going up. When there's supply and demand, when supply is low, the price goes up. And then the two major suppliers of fuel on Anguilla, when the bulk fuel levy license fee was increased to $750,000 a year, the two, Delta and Sol, decided to pass on that to the public, so the price went up at the pump. We were in discussions with them, and they met with us and said they would take it under consideration, and before we came to an agreement, how as good corporate citizens they would absorb some of that, because in good times when they make big profits, they were not expected to pass those on to the community, and in bad times we felt that they should work with the government in that regard, helping the people of Anguilla, and didn't. So those are the two issues right now. Certainly, that shipping prices have gone up. That's in the news every day. So that would also affect the price, and that will also affect the price in the supermarkets. So, as young people, it does get political. And so, it's out there on the street that because the GST Act was implemented, that's why the price is up in the stores. But GST doesn't come in until July of 2022. So, for politics, you'll hear these things, but the real thing is that shipping prices has gone up. Supply of foodstuff has gone up. And to get it to Anguilla doesn't produce much. So everything has to come in. So the world prices go up, the prices will go up in Anguilla. So I would hope that people will be objective when they, see things and come up with the right answers rather than it's just blue or yellow.
Thank you very much, and a pleasant good afternoon to all members here and those watching via social media. The question, what provisions are being made to combat climate change? I would dare say that we need a fundamental change in how we construct our buildings as well. Because as you move around the government departments, there are huge buildings and all of them are air conditioned and lights are on all day. There's no provision for natural fresh air. And even the equipment that we put in our buildings necessitates the use of high cooling. So I think we can make a start by beginning to think seriously about construction of our buildings. When we look at all of these new government buildings that are coming on stream now, none of them have any on them any solar panels or any other means of generating natural energy. And so these are the kinds of things, as we think about climate change, that in terms of our construction of our buildings, so forth, we have to begin to prepare them for utilizing solar energy and other forms of natural energy.
Thank you. Do we have any more contributions for this question? Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to.
We have, we'll take the Leader of Opposition first, and then we'll come to you, Mr. Hughes.
So good afternoon to everyone. First of all, let me say it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you once again, and it appears that you are having an excellent Youth Week, and so congratulations to you. I also bring apologies as well on behalf of Mr. Evan McNeil Rogers, who is currently overseas, as well as Mr. Cardigan Connor, who was unable to be here this afternoon. The issue as to combating climate change in Anguilla has the potential to go very far and wide. And it extends beyond the purchasing of electric cars, but it also goes towards reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, more reliance on renewable energy, making provisions for the feasibility of purchasing individual homes, etc., purchasing solar panels as well as batteries to be able to install in their homes, as well as updating our Electricity Act to contemplate the source of the feeding of solar energy that are generated at different avenues back into the Anglic generation farm. There's a lot of work that has to be done, and I think that over the years, various administrations have talked about it, but have not been able to implement for one reason or the other. The largest reason has been a lack of resources. So for instance, statements were made in relation to buildings and not having solar panels. And the reality is that the cost of solar panels and the reconstruction of the buildings, while the infrastructure may be there to be able to feed into solar panels in the future, at this point, certainly in relation to the Albina Lake Arch Comprehensive School, certainly at this time, the funding that would have been made available from the UK $60 million grant was not sufficient to include the installation of solar panels. And so that is something that I understand that this government is now looking at to obtain additional funding. And so everything has to take place in stages, but certainly the important idea is that steps are taken forward to get us to that point. Also, we have to look at the sustainable fishing in Anguilla. And so while it is that we fish now, we certainly do not fully explore our 200 nautical miles that we have. At the end of the day, the questions as to depletion of fish stocks, our resources, the water, etc., the coral reefs being damaged, we have to look at ways in which we can maintain and even revive or even create new coral reefs so as to encourage fish stock, etc. And so there are some things that are beyond our control. If it is that we have warming of our oceans and as a result the fish in our waters seek cooler waters, that may be something beyond our control because Anguilla as a small island development state, it's very difficult to be able to control what happens in the wider region. But each one of us have to do our own part. And I have to say that this, the entire week, the entire topic of discussion today is very close to my heart as a person with a first degree in environmental science. It is something that I am keen to ensure that we continue, that we commit to following through on. And this has to be sustainable, it has to be continuous, and it has to go beyond administrations. Thank you.
Thank you. We are joined by the Minister of Infrastructure, Communications, Housing, Utility, and Tourism, and he would like to make a contribution at this time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Skelke. This too is a topic that is close to my heart, and indeed the entire administration. We've been talking about making Anguilla more resilient and evolving our energy supply from fossil fuels that have so much external factors as it relates to costs to controlling our energy here in Anguilla. I just came from outside, and what I noticed is that we have an abundance of sunshine. Also, we have an area in Anguilla called the Corridor Landfill, and has been a tremendous hazard, because we've seen fires over there. We've seen the disadvantage that residents in that particular area have endured. And there's another aspect to developing energy, and we call it reusable energy, where we can take the waste and turn it into energy. So that is something that we are aggressively pursuing. The renewable energy aspect is another area that we are aggressively pursuing. We have tasked Anguilla, which is owned majority by the people of Anguilla, to coming up with a plan where they can integrate renewable energy. And while it is, we have a number of large buildings in Anguilla that has recently been erected. Those buildings are going to come at a tremendous cost in terms of maintenance and electricity. The schools, for example, the Albina Lagos Comprehensive School, the Vivian Vanderpool Primary School, the Road Primary School, Agent T. Hazel Primary School, and even the combined services building over at the airport have a tremendous amount of roof space. And I know the Minister of Economic Development and the Parliamentary Secretary, along with the Premier, have been working diligently to ensure that renewable energy is incorporated not only to service those buildings, but also to feed back into the grid. Some years ago, there was a report that was done by a company called Castalia, and legislation came thereafter. And that legislation has sat idle for the last 6-7 years. And it is something that we've been actively working on to modify the legislation to ensure that we are not violating any international protocols while ensuring that we can have renewable energy for Anguilla. And you'll have things such as net metering and what have you, whereas you can actually receive a check from the utility company rather than you paying a check to the utility company at all times. So there's a lot of work that is being done, not only by my ministry, but also the government of Anguilla, to ensure that the goal of the sustainable development goals in terms of renewable energy and combating climate change is realized by this administration at this time.
Thank you. We'll now take a question from the audience.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a question for the Honorable Mrs. Quincy Gomes-Marie. You mentioned earlier that you wanted to utilize the excessive sargassum that we have here in Anguilla. And earlier we had a presentation by Mr. Johanan Dujan, who's an eco-entrepreneur from St. Lucia. And he made us aware of his sargassum-based fertilizer, which is being exported regionally and internationally. He stated that it is also sold in Anguilla. So are you aware of its existence? It's called Algas Organics, I believe.
Yes, it was brought to my attention, although I don't know a whole lot about it. It was brought to my attention by the same team that's exploring what we will do with our sargassum as an example of what can be done. I was hoping to pull up the the project description real quickly, but I wasn't able to do so. But probably before the end of today, I can let you have an idea of what we were looking to do. But across the region, many persons are utilizing sargassum as for fertilizer. Even here in Anguilla, many persons who engage in cleaning up the beaches, they put this sargassum in a way that farmers can come and benefit from it, and then they leave it there to break down what's not taken. So we do have that on a certain scale in Anguilla, for sure, and it's something that is definitely supported by government.
We will have another question from the audience at this time.
Good afternoon. This question is for whoever can answer. I just want to know if the opportunity to develop an industry based around sargassum would be, sorry? No, it's okay. Would the space be given to entrepreneurs for that exploration, or would that be something that is done by government? That's my first question.
Yeah, businesses like that are businesses that government would definitely support. The entrepreneurial spirit in Anguilla certainly is still alive. So, any initiative that young persons may have as it pertains to utilizing, whether it's sargassum as it comes up on the beach, or whether it is the development of sea moss farms throughout the coastal areas. Those are all initiatives surrounding the blue economy that, as a young person, someone interested in developing businesses, government would always be willing to support. And I know the Get Set program that is offered by the Department of Youth and Culture is also another support structure that assists in developing these ideas from your head to the paper to actual implementation of them. So we definitely welcome those sort of initiatives and investments.
At this juncture, I'd like to remind our listening and viewing audience joining us virtually that we do have youth representatives monitoring the live feed, and please feel free to submit your questions via the chat options, or you can send them to someone that you know may be in this room at the moment. All right? We can go back to Alicia.
My second question. The second question is, there was a mention about the new infrastructure within Anguilla, the schools, etc. So I didn't really understand. Is there an active plan in place currently that is seeing renewable energy being used within the infrastructure? Is it just our plans still? Because I just wanted considering how long is it gonna take for us to actually see because the schools are already built. So.
Well, I would let the Minister of Education go on to timelines, but one of the things that we are faced with is the lack of financial resources in Anguilla to finance capital investments like that. Because in order to outfit the schools with solar energy, it would take very close to millions for all of the schools to be done in that way. So one of the good things we have is that with the advancement of the sustainable goals, many international bodies and international governments are putting finances into going green, or ensuring that you have protection of the green resources or even the blue economy. And so we are trying to take advantage of that, and we're being very intentional by actively looking at opportunities for bids for Anguilla. One of the major bids that we intend to put towards COP26, and if you're not familiar with COP26 is basically like the G7. All of the countries come together and look at how they are managing their resources, their natural resources, and how they can assist countries with difficulties to manage their resources to get in line with that. So we are making a bid to COP26. We hope to be successful. One of the successful bids that we did have from COP26 was to explore the waste management at Carritor landfill, because as we know right now, it's not in the best shape. Persons in the community are always complaining about the scent and the presence of flies and other things like that. So we are looking at a feasibility study, because again, this is not something that the government can afford on its own, and we were successful in that bid.
Just to, I guess, answer your question in relation to whether or not there is an actual plan or it's something that's in formulation. It is something that's in formulation at the moment, because while there is space on the existing structures to place solar panels, we don't, of course, as the parliamentary secretary outlined, we don't have the financial resources at the moment to purchase millions of dollars worth of solar panels for the schools specifically. That being said, there are a number of avenues by which we're looking to pursue solar panels for the schools. The parliamentary would have touched on using bidding internationally for these solar panels through climate change forums. There's also the ability to use public-private partnerships through the framework for fiscal responsibility to see whether or not we can get a private supplier to install them and kind of get their money back over time for the development of solar panel electricity at the schools. So it's not something that we have off the cuff, it's just something that's in formulation. Part of the reason why it's still in formulation is because there are a number of other critical infrastructure needs for the school specifically that we prioritize over the use of solar panels. So for instance, the school has classrooms and TVET, classrooms and culinary blocks, etc., but it doesn't have a TVET center. So TVET is a critical part of our development of young people, because we have a comprehensive school system which doesn't only focus on academics, it also focuses on practical and vocational subjects. So with us not having right now a building with a TVET lab, we have on the list of capital projects, the TVET lab is much higher than the solar panel infrastructure and capital needs. So while there is a plan in formulation, it's not our top priority, unfortunately, in education, and I know that a lot of people have deemed it to be very important, but even though it's important, there are other priorities which will come in place above it in order for us to be able to move our educational plan effectively, and so that we can get off of the shift system on which our students are currently working. And we won't be able to get off that shift system until we have a technical vocational education training block at the school.
Thank you.
My first question is to the Honorable Premier. You would have mentioned that due to the ship getting stuck in the canal, there has been an increase in the gas prices as well as food prices. And we would like to know how far have y'all reached, and if you have started working on the price control bill/act.
The short answer to that is that we have tasked the Attorney General Chambers to come up with that. At this time, we don't have the draft in hand, but we know it's being worked on, and we anticipate that will be in place before July of 2022. We do have a whole suite of consumer protection legislation that we're working on, including price control.
My next question is, what percentage of the budget goes towards the environment?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but certainly, maybe the Minister for Natural Resources might know, but I just know that when we did our supplementary budget a couple of weeks ago, we did have to put some more money into the Department of Natural Resources. So we do know the importance of it. We have increased our insurance with the catastrophic risk facility to make sure that if there is any impact from storms, that we can build back faster and stronger. And we have looked at also our marine parks, and so there's and then the Anguilla National Trust. We have committed funds to that, and so there is funding that goes into the caring for the environment. Just the exact percentage, I'm not sure.
Well, that then adds to my next question, going back to the provisions that are being made to combat climate change. We are aware of the importance of sand beds, sand dunes, as well as coral reefs. So what is being done to inform our community at the island at large as to the importance of the coral reefs as well as the sand beds? Because we know sand mining is happening, especially on the eastern side of the island. I know that somewhere in one of the acts would have given the permission, the responsibilities to the fisheries department to spectate those beaches, but they are not given the authority or the permission to say to even report or take pictures, and I'm sure the pictures cannot be used as evidence in court as persons, as evidence towards whatever case they may come across, as well as why not have update the legislature to then probably not give them the responsibility, but have someone that works in that department who can then enforce the laws that are there?
That's an excellent question. I'll turn it over to the minister in a second. But you know, the Minister of Infrastructure and Tourism always talks about that we pass laws, but we don't enforce them.
Exactly.
And we have laws that have enforcement, that has teeth in them, but you know, whoever is tasked with enforcement doesn't do it. And that's one of the things that, you know, we are finding, that we are told that it's not the culture of Anguilla to enforce any laws, that it's intrusive when we put in enforcement parameters. But that's something that we are working on, working with the Royal Anguilla Police Force, Customs, and other entities, even fisheries. I certainly know what you're talking about there. We have asked the Royal Anguilla Police Force to inspect and to patrol the beaches where sand mining is known to happen. In fact, it's almost unconscionable when you go up on the eastern side to see the big holes that have been dug. You know, you would think that meteor fell in and destroyed the beaches the way that. And this is all we can do is, you know, we ask the police to enforce the laws that are already on the books. Fisheries can help if we give them enforcement capabilities, but you know, there are already entities that are supposed to do the enforcement. So we are pushing hard to make sure that happens through the governor's office, because in the end, the governor's office is responsible for police, fire, and other entities like that. I'll let the minister speak now.
Yeah, before I go, Minister Hughes would like to say something.
Just to follow up on what the Premier said, from the time I was your age, and I'm 2 weeks away from being 50, we've been talking about this issue. And I remember as a youngster, there was signage around the beaches, including the Cove Bay, which we went to often, about sand mining. And right now there's legislation that speaks to sand mining. As a matter of fact, if you want to take a cup of sand off the beach, you have to seek permission before you can take that cup of sand off the beach. So it's interesting to see the caption in which this is covered online. The new council is meeting with the policymakers. So here at this table are the policymakers, the persons who go to Parliament to pass legislation. And persons on the street would say, the government isn't doing anything. You know, people see all the time trucks coming from the eastern side of the island with sand. And I don't see any paved roads leading to those beaches on the eastern side of the road. As a matter of fact, if you drive those roads, they're among some of the worst roads in Anguilla. So it means that those trucks have to take their time to drive from the beaches on the far eastern side of the island to reach to the main road to then sell the sand elsewhere. And you know that sand is being mined from the eastern side of the island. I know that the sand is being mined from the eastern side of the island. So it behooves me that person say, well, the politicians ain't doing nothing because look, the truck just passed and the sand is on the back of the truck. But we are the law makers, but we are not the enforcers of said laws. Those persons who are responsible for enforcement of the law, and we're talking about sand mining, but there's also other things such as the Litter Abatement Act.
Minister, this is my question. I should have known better than to give him the mic first. So just to answer your question, I'm not as long-winded as the minister, but the Environmental Management Act falls under the Department of Environment, which falls under the Natural Resources Department. And shortly, we will be taking that draft bill to the public for consultation. You know, we notice the issues around Anguilla. We see the sand mining. We see the negative effects that it have, not only to the beach that is being eroded, but to surrounding beaches. You know, it doesn't just impact that particular section that is being mined, but there are consequences around the island, because Anguilla, being a small island, being a coastal island, it doesn't just affect that area. It affects areas in the western part of the island. It affects areas on the northern side of the island. So it is something that we are definitely coming to the public with to have consultation within short order.
I know
just
that.
Before you ask the other question, the minister and myself share ministries. As junior minister to Minister Kyle, one of the things on our legislative agenda for the 2022 budgetary cycle year would be to enforce more environmental legislation. And at this time, I will have to ask for your assistance with advocacy, because there is an existing generational divide. We, and I say we because I'm 28, not much older than you guys, we are the youth that are looking towards the future, and we are seeing our environments depleting and degrading and being erased right before our eyes. And we have to tell our parents, our grandparents, the older people in our communities, we have to speak and advocate on behalf of the environment. There are many persons who feel like this is my land, this is my beachfront property, this is my land that my great-grandfather gave to me. You, government, can't tell me what to do with my land. But it's not that government is telling you what to do. Government is telling you how to use your land in a sustainable way. And if we, as young persons, don't join together and confront the culture that because it is mine, my use does not impact the rest of the island and perhaps even the region, because we don't know how far reaching our fingerprints and footprints would be on the entire region. Until we confront that sort of mentality, we won't have an actual change. Legislators and policymakers can go to the House and change laws, but it's behaviors that need to be changed the most. We have to have an understanding and a respect for our environment and know that when I do this, this is the result. And you had a question about education. We are doing quite a few initiatives in education. Currently, right now, we're doing a few education initiatives with fisherfolk, because we understand the importance of empowerment through education. We want fisherfolk to understand why you should not fish in marine protected areas, because instead of saying, government is saying don't fish there, you have a reason and a purpose and a rationale to say, I am going to ensure that this pelagic stock is protected, and this area gives room to other types of fish to grow. And I would, instead of fishing inland, I would go further out and do commercial fishing, because I know the impact. And until we understand and take and realize that the future we want lies directly with how we interact with the environment today, we won't have those changes. And it takes a lot more than passing a bill or telling someone to enforce something, because once a police vehicle passes, I can say, okay, police is gone, come get your sand, and then no one knows what happened. But we have to have the social conscience to ensure that when we utilize our environment, we are doing so in a sustainable way.
I just kind of wanted to plug in right here because the parliamentary said something I had wrote down just before she started talking. But I wanted to say there are organizations in Anguilla at the moment that are trying to do the heavy lifting of changing attitudes, mostly from the older generation, but using the younger generation. For instance, you have the Anguilla Enhancement Project, and part of their mandate is allowing us to take pride in our natural resources and use them in a way that is responsible. And that is very important because, as we said, the culture is also a big impediment to how do we value the decisions made around protecting our environment. And I can speak from this because I know that a lot of Anguillians have a very negative perception of the Anguilla, the National Trust, because they think that a lot of the actions that are taken against their land, as the parliamentary secretary said. So in order for policies to make sense, and if these are policies that you are very, very passionate about, you have to be passionate about them in your home. You have to be passionate about them in your social groups, in your WhatsApp chats, on your TikTok, everywhere you could possibly be passionate about it, because that's the only way you're going to create lasting change. Because if the older generation does not feel the same way you do, and young people make up 37% of Anguilla's population, and if the rest 53% don't feel as passionate about environmental protection as you do, then we're going to have an impasse. So we need to be more active as it relates to, at the table at home, addressing these issues.
If I may, Ms. Emmanuel, just say a few words before you continue. You made mention of enforcement, and from a legal perspective, one of the issues with respect to enforcement is proof. And so no matter how many police officers, wardens, etc. you have, you would have to essentially find the person in the act, which means a video of the vehicle loading the sand, driving off, even if you have the sand with the vehicle number, etc. That is a proof that's going to be required when you go to court to charge someone. And so unless we have cameras, or you just happen to see someone driving on the road, you take a picture of it, you can trace back who the vehicle number goes to, etc. We may have a lot of these wonderful provisions on the books, but if we do not have the ability to capture or to obtain the proof that you can produce in court, then it's going to be very difficult to enforce the provisions, no matter how much we try to do so. The other thing as well is that the reason why sand is being sold, and we have to be cognizant of it, is to construct buildings, homes, etc. And so especially persons that own property, undeveloped property, land on which sand dunes are located, etc., see it as a profit, as their land that they can use to be able to obtain a profit from it. Or even if you pick it up, it's not your property, it's the beach. And you go to the beach, you collect the sand, and you're going to sell it. And in most circumstances, it's sold to someone to construct. So we have to be very real, because we are talking about the environment, we're talking about protecting the environment for the future, and that has to be, how do you manage the fact that if persons don't collect sand or do sand mining, where is it that they're going to get the sand to be able to build whatever structures they need to build? And so there is a lot of tension that comes into it, recognizing, appreciating, and enforcing our provisions that protect the environment, but also being practical in how do we address this? How do we move away from utilizing sand collected from the beach, from the dunes, etc., to build our structures?
Aisha, can I ask you a question? I know you're talking about a lot of things in relation to activism, but we also know that young people are not a monolith. So while yourself and some of the young people sitting in the audience may be very passionate about climate change and environmental protection, there may be young people who do not care at all. So the question I have to ask you is, I've seen you with the National Youth Council, National Youth Ambassador Corps, going around, beach cleanups, etc. How are you reaching out to the younger people in your age group who may not be as passionate about environmental issues?
Well, that question then goes back to you. You can implement it in education system to make
That is
them
true.
aware of what they need to do.
That is
And that
true.
could be something that can also be done in the PSHE classes, carry them out in the community to then give back. But thank you so much. Thank you all for answering my questions. And the last statement, question I would have had, the Honorable Parsec and the Honorable Minister of Social Development and Education would have answered my question. And thank you so much, Honorable Leader of the Opposition. You did add and give clarity on the legislation, but we need to also be mindful of the impact, how to say, because we would have done, the Anguilla Youth Parliament would have done a debating the moot, conserving, wait, what was? I can't remember. Our natural resources are being threatened and need to be conserved, something along that line. And in committee stage, we would have gathered information on the impact we can have by using the sand from the beaches, as this not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not, definitely, when the sand is not, it has to go through a process.
Replenished?
That might be the word.
Renewable.
Purified.
Oh.
Replenish and purified. Either word can be used. Yes. So the durability of having that building, it will not stand as long as you would like it to. So that's something that we need to be considerate of as well. And because there isn't an environmental assessment, they aren't aware of these things. And this is something that goes back to education.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taisha, for your questions. We do have quite a bit of questions coming in from the online platform. So at this juncture, I'm probably going to have to ask us to limit to maybe 1 or 2 answers, as brief as you possibly can, so that we can address as many of the questions that have been submitted online. We're going to go to one more question from the audience first, and then head into the online questions.
Good afternoon again. My question is there a recycling act in Anguilla? And if not, what are your thoughts on implementing one and introducing things like recycling bins?
You got that one yesterday. There's no recycling act in Anguilla. But many years ago, well over 20 years ago, there was a pilot program that was started, and people participated, but it was unsuccessful.
It is something that we'll have to look into. Like the minister said, there's no act in place now, but as you drive around, you see different color bins. So it is something that I myself need to be more educated on. There's a blue bin. I don't know who collects the blue bin, but it's something that I'll look into. But it's a good idea. It's a good idea because it separates the garbage. And if we could separate the garbage before it gets to the landfill, then it makes it a lot easier to manage Carito's landfill. It's an area that we can definitely enhance and improve. So thank you for that question.
Yes, thank you. Many years ago, as the Minister for Infrastructure was stated, there was a project, and the recycling would have involved cans and bottles being collected from across Anguilla and then shipped, placed on a barge and taken to Puerto Rico. But I believe because of the cost over time, that project would have come to a halt. I think what is needed in Anguilla is, at the very least, a public-private partnership if we don't have a private entity to be able to come in to actually establish recycling right here in Anguilla, because the largest cost would have been placement on the barge and traveling. But if we are able to implement our own recycling here in Anguilla, where we are able to recycle glass and soda cans, etc., and even utilize it, whether we utilize it in our roads, in the asphalt, etc., I think that could open another avenue. But certainly it requires investment And it requires thought in terms of how we go about it.
Thank you. One of the questions that came into us from our satellite location at the Blowing Point Youth Development Center, it kind of comes back to the mention of the solar panels on schools. What about the possibility of having investors cover the costs in exchange for tax exemption? What are your thoughts?
That is more cumbersome than you would imagine.
Mike.
No, I said that is more cumbersome than you imagine. The legislative framework does not allow for those type of setups as it is. So it's probably possible. I would allow the lawyers in the room, the two lawyers at the panel who can speak to that. It's probably possible, but it's a lot more cumbersome. We've seen instances of attempts of such nature, but I don't think it will pass the internal audit if it were to be done.
As it relates to capital infrastructure, which I believe the solar panels would fall within the category of capital infrastructure, there is the ability for persons to donate capital infrastructure. It would be a little bit more difficult in terms of going through what concessions would be necessary or would be possible for someone to cover the costs of installing those solar panels. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but there is a regulatory framework that surrounds that, and a gifting policy. I believe there is a gifting policy that exists within the government of Anguilla that would deal with what is required from the government of Anguilla's side in order to receive gifts of that nature and of that size.
Thank you. Every memorandum of agreement or memorandum of understanding has in it that the developer promises to be a good corporate citizen. And I think it's left up to governments of the day to determine how the developer would be a good corporate citizen. It may not necessarily be as a write-off or quid pro quo, but it could be something that could be explored. The other thing as well is the previous panelists are correct that the legislative framework makes it difficult. But as legislators, it would also be possible to explore amending the framework and discussions with the UK, etc., to ensure that it does not fall out of compliance with any other requirements, provisions, etc., that they have. But I do believe that it is possible to explore whether or not, and if it is, that it is ultimately intended to benefit Anguilla, for us to be able to achieve certain projects that we won't otherwise achieve, but it's done in an open and transparent way. It may well be possible to explore that and have discussions with the powers that be.
Thank you. Another question that we have submitted from online was, as it relates to climate change, government plans to implement an environmental management bill. When do they plan to do so?
I believe it's on the legislative agenda for 2022. Which quarter of 2022? I'm not sure. I don't have that detailed list of in terms of quarters, but it is planned and scheduled for 2022 enactment. But of course, we will be coming to the public for public consultation first.
Another question that was submitted earlier was, what plans exist to protect indigenous plants? We would have heard very many years ago, several exposés actually came out about there being a species of plant that only exists on Anguilla. And what are the plans that do exist to protect our indigenous plants and animals?
This is an area that the Anguilla National Trust along with the Department of Environment, they manage and supervise this area. The Anguilla National Trust, the Premier would have mentioned earlier, that government of Anguilla would normally give them an annual subvention, but they also bid and bid for grants to deal with different conservation efforts. In terms of a dollar figure, I don't have that, but there are plans that department, they usually, would win bids, would win grants to be able to take care of the environment and the different plant species, invasive species, getting rid of those and protecting those that are indigenous to Anguilla.
We have a question.
I think that, just sorry about that, the minister doesn't want to say he's been saving lizards and rats and not rats, he said. But I mean, and then there was a plant that he was on the list of things that we were conserving.
Lignum vitae, something like that. The Anguilla bush.
Yeah, Anguilla bush, yeah. So I mean, efforts are made to preserve the indigenous plants, fauna and flora of Anguilla. And we, with the Department of Natural Resources and ANT, the Anguilla National Trust, we have been able to find funding to do that. And that's something that we'll continue to do. And as the minister said, we also, in preserving our indigenous plants and animals, we have to get rid of those invasive species, whether plant or animal, such as certainly iguana and rats, sombrero. So those are things that we're doing, and certainly we want to preserve Anguilla for you and for your children and your children's children, and you have to take an active part in that. And I think that by asking these questions, you are certainly showing that interest, and we do hope you'll continue to advocate, as the Minister and Parliamentary Secretary said, and because you have to be able to talk to those of us with less hair or gray hair to instill in us that this is the way that the world is now.
Thank you for that. We have a question submitted from the audience here. The owner of Frangipani made his wealth from being involved in the solar sector. Can discussions or collaboration be done with him or members of the private sector to help solve our approach to using solar energy?
Well, certainly those are innovative ways that we can do these things. Earlier it was mentioned of what type of bill it would take to get solar panels on the schools. You're looking at upwards of $1 million. And we do have written in any MOU that we have signed since we came in social projects. Frangipani was done before we came in. But it is something that we can look into. I know certainly we are engaged with several entities right now looking at renewable energy projects to come up with 20 megawatt solar plants to provide solar energy to the country. And hopefully what has been suggested is a distributed service where you, instead of one big farm, we use several areas using different substations, and the school roofs can be utilized in that manner. So we do have those ongoing discussions, and specifically Steve Kusher, we have talked with him about solar, not necessarily in terms of him doing it, but certainly getting access to his expertise.
Thank you. And while we are in the vein of clean energy, we have a question that was submitted a little earlier, and it circles back to some statements made on electric cars. How do electric cars save the environment? Don't they use electricity generated by fossil fuels and batteries with climate-degrading characteristics? what is the push behind electric cars if they can be just as threatening?
So I would have mentioned electric cars earlier, and one of the things I said as a benefit of having an electric car is that it creates a savings in terms of your monthly expenses. They do charge with electricity, but it is up to you to now decide whether you want to go fully off-grid, because there is the possibility and the potential for those vehicles to be charged by the sun. You know, all you would need is some solar panels and perhaps a battery bank, and you can take your vehicle completely off the grid. So it's not far-fetched, but step by step, I believe, you know, if we can't get there in one shot, at least we're making small strides to be energy efficient and to be completely off of you know, fossil fuels, so to speak.
I think
I think also you have to think about the pollution, you know, and certainly, you know, the cars right now, the minister mentioned gas guzzlers. They do give off, you know, exhaust and fumes, and they also add to the carbon footprint. And so we want to, you know, encourage going towards electrical cars. And I know that 2 of the ministers up here have electrical cars, and we applaud them for that. And those are the younger ones among us. So while the minister at the end has his, you know. Thank you.
There were also a few studies that would have shown that while in situations like Anguilla, where you have homes predominantly fueled by fossil fuels through the way we generate electricity, that charging your vehicle consumes less fossil fuel than purchasing fuel from the tank. So while it may seem hypocritical in the sense that ultimately it leads back to fossil fuels, either way, you're seeing a situation where your carbon footprint, although not eliminated eliminated by the way of your transportation choice, it is severely reduced. And it's really about making sustainable changes and steps towards complete sustainable change. And while an electric vehicle may not be the absolute best scenario in Anguilla, because ultimately, like the question would have said, it leads back to the consumption of fossil fuel, mindsets and behavioral changes start with small changes. So if you know one of the motivations you have for purchasing electric vehicle is not that you're not going to have any duties, but in fact that you want to make a change towards the type of consumption you have in general, then you could also ensure that, you know, the containers you use, the way you behave, the way you wash your clothes, your dishes, the amount of water you use in your leisure time, your different behaviors will reflect a green economy. So it's more than just your car, even if it didn't lead to fossil fuels.
Well, I mean, as someone who owns, one of the ministers who owns an electric vehicle, one of the predominant reasons for switching over to electric cars would have been finance, because the cost of fuel versus the cost of charging my electric car it's a benefit which I can say I will never go back to a petrol car, because per month, I've measured it, I spend approximately 150 EC dollars on charging my car for the entire month. And that's comparatively to someone who is driving a petrol car who has to top up $40 US every week or even more. I am making a significant savings in relation to my usage. But in addition to that, I mean, yes, we go back to the question of where does it lead, but in addition to where does it lead, we are looking at the cycle of consumption. So while we have an electric car, which may use fossil fuels generated by electricity, those linkages down the supply chain are also changing. So as the world turns towards green and renewable resources, you will see a reduction in that reliance. The minister spoke about using solar panels to charge the cars, but even within the electric vehicle community, you see them looking at how do we recycle batteries used from those electric vehicles so that we're not having an additional impact on the climate from the waste produced by electric vehicles, and those economic incentives for persons to get in the business of recycling batteries and then reusing them on electric cars. That is how we have, through the small changes that the parliamentary secretary said, we're now creating economic incentives for persons to actually close the loop and make it completely renewable. You have to go in stages, but eventually electric cars are going to be the future, not just in Anguilla, but globally, because as governments mandate certain percentages, as they stop the manufacture of certain petrol cars, which has happened. I can't tell you which country, but I do know that a number of countries have prevented manufacturers from continuing with certain vehicle lines. So as we see that this is the train that we're going down, we have to start thinking, how do we participate in those changes, even from Anguilla, both from the perspective of saving the environment, doing our part, although it will be smaller in terms of purchasing electric vehicles to the US, purchasing electric vehicles, but also from the perspective of, I lost my train of thought. Doing our part not only from that perspective, but also in terms of making Anguilla a more sustainable country.
And just last night, Ford Motor Company announced in Detroit that they were putting in $11 billion into developing electrical cars. The new Model T will be, electric. So it just shows that the cost of electrical cars will come down also, because there's going to be more produced. And I think that's the way the world is going. So,
yeah.
And the thing about it is that as we move towards renewable energy here in Anguilla, then everything has its own add-on effects, and then hopefully reduce the cost of electricity, reduce the pollution. We can then make appeals to the superpowers that have caused the climate change by increasing the carbon footprint, which affects the superstorms that we're getting now, tsunamis and things like that, that we can have a bigger impact and get more help. Someone was asking earlier, what we are doing about it. As the parliamentary secretary said, we are reaching out to these powers that be. The UK says that the overseas territories makes up 90% of its biodiversity. Well, they should have to pay us for that, because we have to maintain it, right?
So just to add, the minister informed me which country I was thinking about. Norway has set a deadline of 2025 for all fuel-powered vehicles to cease manufacture. So it is a move that's taking place, and there are a number of benefits for the climate. So I would encourage you, if you're thinking about a car, just like the minister said, to look at electric cars. They might not be the cutest, but they're very efficient.
And just to add to the Premier's point about me owning a Hummer, I just wanted to be noted that since 2008, they have not manufactured any Hummers, but starting 2024, they're only coming out with an electrical Hummer. So if anyone wants to contribute to my birthday gift in 2024, remember what I'm looking for.
Yes, so we will keep that in mind. At this juncture, I just want to add a comment here. I think that this question generated a lot of buzz, and it really made the importance of public education campaigns stand out to me. And I think sometimes we tend to think that public education campaigns only fall under the aegis of the department or the ministry responsible for education, but I am aware that the Department of Natural Resources also has its own officer that is responsible for public education. And so I do believe that while, public education campaigns are important. It's important for us to remember as well that there are these officers that do exist in the Anguilla Public Service who do have access to the information that we would like to know more about. And I think maybe a public education campaign on going green might be worthwhile to explore. I think the young people would be quite interested in that. We have more questions submitted from online. We're going to take 2 more in relation to the theme, the environmental theme. We have gone a bit more green than blue. So we're going to take 2 more of those, and then we are going to open the floor for just a few general questions. I do see a lot of buzz around home ownership, some questions about home ownership on the online submissions. So we'll take 2 more about the environmentally based questions and then go into the general questions. Okay? So here is one. How will government support the sustainable development of maritime transportation as an industry in the blue economy? How will government support the sustainable development of maritime transportation as an industry in the blue economy?
One of the ways that when you're considering a green economy or circular economy, sustainable transportation is always one of the main pillars because of, basically the conversation we just had a while ago. The maritime legislation that's currently being reviewed, as I was looking at the Minister for Infrastructure down there, who's still not making eye contact with me, tackles this in a great way. One of the things that it looks at would be what kind of maritime transportation opportunities are available. Also, in doing so, it also looks at what kind of business, when you do the licensing on an annual basis, how that process can be used to ensure that the boats that's on our waters are moving in a green way and not seeping anything into the environment. I'm trying to think of the other parts of the maritime legislation, but it goes into, it goes very deep into how it describes what levels the transportation should run at and how it will impact our environment. I don't know if that answers the question in full.
In addition to solar power energy, have we considered other sustainable sources of energy? In addition to solar power energy, have we considered other sustainable sources of energy?
And one of the other sources of energy I alluded to earlier was that of waste to energy. Waste to energy. And we won't be the first country to embark on waste to energy in the Caribbean or even in the region. St. Bart's have almost exclusively waste to energy. Barbados, Trinidad, a number of different countries in the Caribbean, and it's growing exponentially in the US. Singapore, for example, has a tremendous waste to energy program where they're actually utilizing the byproducts from the waste to create other byproducts such as potable water, plant, food materials, and also land, where they're building more land out in the Singapore harbor using products such that emanates from the waste to energy programs. Wind is also something that we can look at. We've done a wind study, but wind has its drawbacks. All of them have their drawbacks, as you would appreciate. But also, one of our directors on Anguilla came up with a novel energy producing product many years ago that has gone beyond the initial stages, which is ocean wave currents to generate electricity. So there's a lot of things out there that we can utilize, but one of the low-hanging fruits is solar because of the abundance of sun. But especially when you consider the leading solar producing country in the world is Germany. So Imagine if Germany can do what they're doing, imagine what we can do. So again, the Minister of Social Development spoke of the Framework for Fiscal Responsibility Act, and it shows how we can enter into public-private partnerships, and those public-private partnerships can enable us to have the initial investment upfront, and then over time, through power purchase agreements or whatever vehicle you may use, you can pay for the initial infrastructure.
Do we have any other contributions from the panel?
Some years ago, I believe the Department of Environment will have conducted a study in terms of wind energy, the establishment of wind turbines on the eastern end of the island. We all know that the eastern end of the island produces very high winds, is facing the ocean, etc. And so the idea was that the establishment of wind turbines on that end of the island could generate a significant amount of wind energy that could be funneled throughout Anguilla. I'm not sure what ultimately became of that report, but I think ultimately the largest issue for Anguilla with all of these matters is the financing, coming up with the, going beyond the report and moving towards implementation. So it's certainly something that could be looked into further.
Thank you. We are now going to open the floor a bit more to more general questions. We are moving away from the talks of the green and blue economy and now going into other pressing matters that the young people really feel need to be addressed and would like to engage in very meaningful dialogue on. Earlier in this conference, as I would have mentioned before, we did have the launching of the National Youth Policy. And one of the elements spoken about that Dr. Charles brought up was young people with disabilities. And that sparked a few questions during the conference that were not able to all be answered. We do have 2 that were submitted online, and so I'm now going to ask our techs to pull that up on the screen for us. A major portion of the new youth policy speaks to the accessibility for persons with disabilities. How many of the new school projects take this into consideration? A major portion of the new youth policy speaks to the accessibility for persons with disabilities. How many of the new school projects take this into consideration?
Most of the new school bills take into consideration the need for accessibility, whether it's ramps for persons who may not be able to use the stairs. Of course, we don't, at that point in time, there was no provision for things like elevators to give direct access to multi-level buildings. But as far as ramps go, there is some provision. Not in all of the bills, though, will you have provision for persons who would need special access to the upper levels. So to some regard, there has been some thought given to access, but it hasn't been in all of the constructions. Nevertheless, that is not to say that at some point these structures cannot be retrofitted to include extra access for persons with disabilities.
Thank you. Is there any way we can expand this to, instead of just the new school projects, can we go back to that previous question? So we spoke specifically about the school projects. What about access to general government spaces?
Well, I don't know if general government spaces, a lot of general government spaces would have been spaces the government would have moved into rather than built for a specific purpose, taking into consideration access needs for those persons with disabilities. In the government spaces in general, because the government is renting a lot of its spaces, doesn't have as much accessibility. I can speak from my perspective in the Ministry of Social Development and Education. I'm on the 3rd floor. There is no access unless you're taking the stairs. So you can't come to the ministry. But it is a rental space because the government does not have a centralized office. In the Ministry of Finance and IRD, there is infrastructure that takes into consideration access. They have a lift and they have ramps to access that building. But it's not a cross-government theme that you will see from that perspective. But since we're talking about accessibility, and I don't want to talk about accessibility only from the perspective of physical infrastructure, there is also the issue of accessibility in terms of jobs, in terms of persons continuing, to build their own resilience after they finish school. And part and parcel of the work plan within the Ministry of Social Development and Education is our special SEN policy, which extends now to a program. Of course, we will need the funding for it, but to have a satellite program for those persons with disabilities, the STEPS, it's called STEPS, and it's almost a apprenticeship, a semi-apprenticeship program for sixth form age students who may have disabilities, to kind of get them into workspaces and allow them to be active in those spaces. So when we're talking about accessibility, I don't want to limit it too much to the physical infrastructure, because that's one part of it. And yes, it is an issue, as Anguilla has a growing demographic of persons who may struggle with access issues infrastructurally. But I think the longer term question for us as a country is, how do we integrate those persons into our society so that they can have productive lives and they can feel self-sufficient during the course of their lives in Anguilla?
One of the things we are looking at as it relates to accessibility as well would be our digital transformation policy, which considers different accessibility issues in terms of meeting people where they are and ensuring that citizens who may not be able to physically enter spaces have the ability to interact with those same services via the web and other e-government platforms. Part of that also would be to ensure that all of the websites that we build in the future are able to respond to text-to-speech equipment. And while speaking another language is not a disability, but in terms of access to government services and information, ensuring that the language is also, it is also the ability to change the language and ensure that all citizens have as much of an opportunity as possible to interact with government on a higher level. And that also goes into how we deal with digital literacy, to ensure that we are able to distinguish between someone who can send a WhatsApp message and someone who can interact with an e-government platform, and ensuring that we are able to educate and prepare at least a person in each household to be able to interact with government services. Because part of growing older is not a disability, but sometimes it results in that. So being able to climb stairs and do other things like that may come into question. So ensuring that older persons be able to interact with e-government services is also part of our digital transformation process, to make sure that all services, people have an equitable opportunity to access government services.
Just to touch briefly on the last thing that the Parliamentary Secretary brought up, next month we will be celebrating persons over the age of 65, retired persons, etc., and the role that they play in the Anguillian community and economy. And part of that regionally is the digital transformation and the ability of persons over the age of 65 to access and be able to be digitally literate. I know most of the times persons who are retired would use their grandchildren or their children to help them, assist them with becoming more digitally literate. But part of ensuring equitable access includes providing platforms for them to be educated and to use these digital platforms, because as we move into digital spaces, e-governance spaces, they are still an active part of our society and they still need to be able to access these resources, but the only way that we can do so is if they're educated. And so under the Ministry of Social Development, we're looking at ensuring that we have programs that will allow, especially persons in the Retired Persons Association, which we keep trying to get people to register and to get into the Retired Persons Association. It's not to say, and this is for you, as I know young people are kind of checked out at this part because they're like, this has nothing to do with me. But if your grandparents or your parents need assistance, it is important for them to register with the Retired Persons Association, if they are retired, of course, so that they can have access to the resources that are being pooled and directed towards them. So education, of course, again, plays a very critical role there in terms of making sure that they are digitally literate to be able to access and to be able to participate in where the country is going in the next couple of years.
This is just a quick addition to the physical infrastructure. Of course, the newer schools that are being built have wheelchair access and for persons who have disabilities, but also the Alvin Allison Primary School that was constructed 15 years ago, which is a fairly new school, that also has wheelchair access and the ability to take care of those people who are challenged, whether physically or otherwise. They also have a program down there that deals with challenged youngsters. So, only the older schools that were there before, prior to the 1960s, would not have had that access, because as a kid growing up, we all know that those persons who had challenges, we put them in the back room and nobody saw them. But we have come of age where everybody now has an opportunity.
I do agree with that sentiment about there being a higher visibility level of persons living with disabilities. And I think this question is quite timely. What, if any, policy or legislation is being considered to ensure that all new construction of public spaces are accessible? Are there any policies that do exist? Or maybe they may not be officially written down, but have we considered legislation or policies to ensure that public spaces are equitably accessible?
From my knowledge, I don't think we have any present legislation to address this. It's something perhaps we can look at moving forward. But I do know that a lot of new construction outside of government's construction is being retrofitted to ensure wheelchair access and the like. So that's a good thing that Anguilla as a whole is evolving towards.
If I may, there are the Planning Act may well have something contained. Of course, it's draft. We don't have an act per se. We have policies for now. But it is worth looking at and ensuring that if it's not there, that there is an inclusion, or ensure that it includes the construction of public spaces, or to have wheelchair or accessible spaces, public spaces.
Do we have any questions from the audience at this time? In-house? Okay, we'll be moving on to some of the other general questions that were submitted online. If we can get our technician to load the next one. All right, this is the home ownership topic. It is quite a hot topic among the youth today. I think everyone is trying to find ways to attain the dream of owning a piece of the rock and not wanting to feel like they have to look for life to flourish outside of Anguilla. As it stands, young persons earning under $2,000 US are ineligible for housing loans. How can the government assist in making home ownership accessible to younger buyers? Is that something that government can assist in? Is that possible?
Well, I think given the fiscal space that we are in right now, that would not be doable. But it is something that we discussed, that we would like to see young people being able to have home ownership. In fact, National Commercial Bank of Anguilla did give 100% loans to persons, I don't know that there was that cutoff of US $2,000. Certainly, it is something that government could look into when things are better, doing some kind of subsidies, maybe helping to remove some of the fees in terms of land acquisition. But at this time, government is not in a position where that would be possible.
I think one of the difficulties, I remember at one point asking Minister Hughes or telling him that I didn't realize there was an H in my crew, because you hear it all the time, you don't realize that housing is there, and you sort of wonder what is actually the purpose of the H if we can provide. But in Anguilla, we have to consider the provision of housing in context of what we can do and what government has access to. So in other countries across the region where government provides housing, government uses Crown land and provides housing, which eliminates a great deal of the cost because you are already in ownership of the land. But in Anguilla, where the land is primarily owned by individuals, that already sets the government back a couple steps because they don't have the asset to even start the process. When it comes to that, though, I do believe that there's room beyond government, because even before getting into government, I always felt that we as the private sector had a role to play in shaping the future that we all collectively want. And I think that there is room for existing contractors and persons who are into the provision of cement and concrete and other things like that to partner in a way to provide affordable homes. I know one of the major concerns with someone who I spoke to about that idea was we would have to sort of amend our expectation of what that home would look like. For example, it may be a condo style situation where the homes are close and floors apart, where persons may be thinking of standalone homes. And then even in the construction of those standalone homes, we have to be comfortable with homes that's a bit still in closer quarters. In Anguilla, we are accustomed to having a home that's a bit farther than the next home down the street. So also just in reimagining what we would like to have and being okay with close alternatives to home ownership. But I do think it's something that's attainable, but I think it would take a lot more than government itself carrying the burden, not the burden, but the brunt of the work in terms of providing the actual physical structure.
I think maybe, in addition, one of the things I believe would be really important for young persons who want to have access to their own slice of the rock would be almost to encourage local landowners right now who are holding land maybe in lieu of some more tourism development or some other type of development, waiting for somebody to purchase their land for a specific reason, to maybe reassess the way that they're looking at their land in terms of selling it, because then it's a seller's market, because again, the government of Anguilla doesn't own land. So we have to rely on private citizens when they're disposing of their land to almost encourage them to look inwards and say, I want to pass this land on to another young person, a young Anguillian who wants to own a slice of the rock. So that maybe would come from the government in terms of us encouraging landowners to do so. So maybe in terms of what role can the government play, I think from that perspective, we can play the role of encouraging landowners to consider selling land to young persons at a more reasonable rate than maybe they would want the full value for. But outside of that, of course, like the parliamentary secretary said, it would be a bit more challenging given the reality here in Anguilla with private ownership, with 95% of the land in Anguilla is privately owned. The 5% has competing interests for agriculture, for government development, for foreign investment, and for housing. So it's a very, very small piece of the rock that we have to deal with different interests for. So I think maybe part of what we can do maybe immediately is look to encourage private landowners to sell to young people.
If I may add, the H in the ministry stands for housing. I myself question why it's there. Because Anguilla has a very unique history and a very unique makeup. If you go to any of the other Caribbean islands, whether it be Dominica, whether it be Trinidad, whether it be Jamaica, whether it be Barbados, the land, the bulk of the land, the majority of the land is owned by the state, and it's owned by the state because it came from plutocracy, eminent domain, went to the state, and eventually through housing projects and housing programs, they were able to do rent to own, lease to own, what have you. Anguilla does not have the ability to do that. And for us to say that we can do so would just be lying to ourselves. When it comes to housing, I look at the figure and I say $2,000 US, and I'm looking at the figure and I say, wow, that's impressive because for my own personal experience, my first job was making $94 a week US, and out of that $94 a week US every week, I spent $86 in a pallet of blocks. In a few weeks, I realized that I had 22 pallets of blocks bought. So I have a different perspective as it relates to housing and young people, especially if you have inherited land or if you have family land that you can build on. If you're working and you have a stable job making $2,000 a month and you're living at home, you can sacrifice the Jordans or the Fenty or the Louis Vuitton bag and buy blocks and accumulate them. That's my personal experience. That's what I did because I was 28 years old when I bought my first vehicle, but by that time I already had a house and a business. So to my mind, if you're working, you have a stable job and you already have the land resource, then make the sacrifice that you need to make to reach the goal. If it is that you truly want a house, you must make that sacrifice. It may not go out to the little lounge this weekend and buy a round of drinks for everybody. These are the type of sacrifices you will have to make now while you're young in order to reach that greater goal. So that would be my advice to you based on my own personal experiences.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am neither a minister, elected official, or a youth. And I've listened, and there's a lot of things that I wanted to share this afternoon if it were a different forum, but I really want to speak to that last comment, Minister, and you're absolutely correct. But I think there's a realization that a number of us, and not to differentiate, but the born Anguillan type cohort, there's a realization that I have accepted that we have to come to. We have a lot of Anguillians who are not of Anguillan ancestry, and we also have a lot of Anguillians who are of Anguillan ancestry, but they don't have land. There's nothing for them to inherit, but more and more, though, there are young people, perhaps even in this room, who may be one parent Anguillan, no parents Anguillan, and so who we see as Anguillan youth may not be Anguillan youth, if you get what I'm getting. So that option is really not there for so many of our young people.
And that's why
I just wanted to add that.
That's why I use the caveat, if you have land, and I specifically said if you have land, right? So if you have land, but if you don't have land, and you're a person who migrated, whose family migrated from Dominica and is living in Anguilla, then you have to strategically plan that $2,000, whether or not you're going to buy a house that's on the market, a fixer-upper. You can do that because there's a lot of fixer-uppers around Anguilla. Also, there's options whether you want to buy something that's listed by the receiver Anguilla on Facebook. I see them all the time. Whether you want to buy something via auction, whether you want to get together with some of your friends and have a strata-lot situation, whereas you see an apartment that is selling for $400,000, and 3 and 4 of your friends get together and say, you know what, we're going to buy that and have a strata-lot situation where each one of us own a portion of that particular facility. So there's a lot of options out there. We just have to explore those options, but at the end of the day, we must be willing to make that sacrifice because it comes down to a sacrifice, ownership, whether you have it or not. It comes down to ultimately to a sacrifice on what you really want, whether you want to glam a little bit or whether you want to have some blocks and mortar.
Speaking to a number of young persons across Anguilla, the question is actually a relevant question, and because there's so many young persons that want to be able to build their homes, but for whatever reason, mostly financial, they're unable to. And more especially for a number of young persons, young Anguillans that have gone off to university, would have had to take loans, whether it was from the Anguilla Development Board or wherever else, and have come back to Anguilla. They are involved in various professions, whether it's teaching or some other profession. And the income that they make is simply not sufficient for them to pay their school loans, to afford housing wherever they are, especially if they're not at home, and to build, whether or not they own land. And so it is an issue, I believe, that is relevant, it's timely, and there are so many young persons that are actually grappling with how to be able to make ends meet. The other thing to consider is that during our parents' days, their houses were built by cousins and family and friends, etc., coming on the weekends, in the evenings, etc., and helping to build a house. So they build one house, then they go to another friend and they build a house. That sort of camaraderie doesn't really exist today, not necessarily because, well, in part because time has moved on, but also because people have their own busy lives. And so you find that it may happen, but it doesn't happen as often as it used to happen. And so Anguilla, for the most part, will have been built on family and friends helping. So you won't have had necessarily the cost of a contractor and the employees, etc. You have had persons that will have been able to come out with their family and friends and be able to put it together. And so the cost would have been a lot decreased. Now, when you add the purchase of land, because over time we've had Anguillians, you may be land rich and money poor. You have medical expenses, you sell the land to be able to take care of the medical expenses. There are other issues. Sometimes you have to sell to be able to send a child off to school. So whereas you would have had land, by the time you have dealt with your personal situation, you no longer have access to that land. And so the question is now for the next generation, how do they build? Because the landscape of Anguilla has changed somewhat from what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so those are real factors that we have to consider.
We did have a follow-up question related to what role can the government play in assisting, and there it is on screen. How does government feel about duty-free concessions on material for first-time homeowners? Is that something that can be explored? Is that something that is a realistic area that the general public, especially the youth within the general public, can expect the government to explore?
That is something that one can explore, but it has an impact there's a significant impact from that. Case in point, the coffers of government, the consolidated fund that provides goods and services will feel the impact of that. The hardware stores will feel the impact of that. The employment situation at the hardware stores will feel the impact of that. Tax revenues will feel the impact of that across the board. So yes, that can be explored, but we must remember too that once that is done, there's also other impacts that follow down from that, which may be even greater than that impact. But I want to say this though, to the point of my colleague on the end. The cost of building have jumped exponentially over the last few weeks. Building materials, in particular wood and pipe, have jumped. Lumber and pipe have jumped over 100%. The cost of freight out of the U.S. have jumped exponentially. A 40-foot container that was a year ago was $4,000 from China to the U.S. is now $20,000. So obviously, and if Joe Biden infrastructure program goes through, expect those costs to go up even more because the shortages or the perceived shortages will drive the prices up. So I don't have any quick answer to that, but I do know that even if this is done, even if the duty-free concession will be granted to first-time homeowners, it have an impact on a number of different areas across the society and across the economy.
Is it safe to ask or to say that the impact that we would see to local businesses here with concessions of this nature for first-time homeowners, is it, to be quite honest, from a very personal standpoint, I'm not going to use my role as Dean of the National Youth Ambassadors Corps to make this statement. I'm just speaking personally now. How does that differ from the impact that we may see with concessions that are afforded to developers?
The concessions that are granted to developers for the construction phase, the rationale behind the concessions that are granted to developers in Anguilla is no different to the rationale granted to developers across the Caribbean. Everybody's competing for the same developers to produce employment for their particular country. Let us use Aurora, for example. We recently had a new developer, Mr. Schultz, who bought the Cuisinart Golf Resort and Spa and is putting hundreds of millions of dollars in investment in that. Out of those hundreds of millions of dollars, he has employed 500-600 people. What is the impact, the economic impact of his employment of 500-600 people just in the construction phase, and another 400 people once the property is up and running, generating the revenues not only to the government of Anguilla through the tax receipts, but also to employers and employee situations. So, and this is a long-term situation, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So I know the argument is always given, how is it that you're giving a duty-free concession to a multi-billionaire to invest in your country, but me, who want to build a house, you're not giving me that same concession. But it's not a fair comparison because the impact to the economy is totally different.
Moreover, beyond that point, I think the social impact also depends upon the will of the government of the day, because this administration has been very intentional in the way that we do our MOUs to ensure that we know what this social impact will be, and we have actually created a list across all ministries of all the works that we need to have done, and every developer that comes to the table, we say, based on the value of the project, here are a list of things you can do, and we put it forward to them. I don't know if the Minister of Education is prepared to talk about the contributions, the multiple contributions the Schultz Foundation will be making towards the education fraternity in Anguilla and the students in school, because it's very great. But even right now with our development of the Clayton JL International Airport, we couldn't afford seating as a government. We couldn't afford to replace the seats that were destroyed in Hurricane Irma. And it was a relationship with the same developer that we would have received over $50,000 worth of seats. So we see that, I know a lot of persons are concerned about the way we grant concessions, but if we are sure to send the message across that these concessions are for ease of importing items to the country, but will not be done at disadvantage to the general population, you see that persons are willing and prepared to be good corporate citizens as long as there's a clear will from the political directorate to ensure that those services are provided.
And even though those concessions are granted to developers, a significant amount of the building materials is purchased locally, whether it be blocks, steel, etc. A lot of the aggregate, for example, is purchased locally. The concrete to build these properties, there's millions of dollars in concrete to build these properties. So the knock-on impact to the overall economy is significant, because of these developers having these concessions to be able to come to Anguilla and develop in Anguilla, we can then now provide social services, health, education. $17 million of our national budget goes to the health authority to provide, to subsidize the health authority to ensure that persons can have health care. So it is just not granting a concession, but also you have to weigh what the benefits are. What is the benefit of not having that developer invest in Anguilla and invest in Turks and Caicos, right, as opposed to Anguilla? So it is just not just grant a concession, but it's also what the benefits are derived, not only in the initial startup, but also ongoing. I just want to make this quick point. None of the memorandums and none of the development agreements with any of these developers envision having concessions go beyond the opening date. So once these hotels are open and all of their normal goods that they import are subjected to the same tariff that I am subjected to, the same duties that I am subjected to, they are subjected to. So once you see the Aurora open, they import a case of chicken breast, they pay whatever taxes that I have to pay. And so over the duration of that operation, the people of Anguilla, the country Anguilla, and employees derive significant benefits from that. They can now take that money that they make from working in that establishment to build homes.
Just before the minister go, I also want to add the provision of an MRI machine from the same company. So just to give you an idea of the levels of investment that we are trying to get as an exchange for the concession.
I guess just to cap it off, a lot of the MOUs that have been signed recently have had very wide-ranging social benefit clauses. Specifically the one with the Schultz Foundation and Aurora, they have been very, very involved in what social benefits they want to provide to the people of Anguilla, and some of those are going to come on stream. One of the benefits is going to be the provision of laptops to students in partnership with APANE, which is the Anguilla Progressive Association of New York. They have matched a donation given by APANE, which allowed us to get $70,000 US to purchase laptops for students in the school, which is not an insignificant amount of money. So that's one part of it. They're also looking at other educational initiatives to assist us with, which are going to be quite expensive in nature, and we'll be able to give more details on them very soon. But it goes to show that when you have, like, what's very important for a lot of these developers is you have to have a plan for what they're supposed to give to. So if you are saying, if the government is saying the government wants X, Y, and Z, the government has to be able to provide the developers with that information so that they can put the money behind it. And what this MOU specifically is the clause is being enforced almost immediately. But there would have been previous MOUs where it would have been very vague as to what would be the social benefit to the people of Anguilla, or it would not have been enforced. And so I think a lot of people may, when they perceive these duty-free concessions and they don't see the corresponding benefit to the people of Anguilla, there may be that pent-up feeling of what is the purpose of this concession, what is the benefit to the people of Anguilla besides the economic benefit. So now, at this point in time, there is a priority on the part of this administration to enforce these clauses to make sure that we are prepared and we can give investors when they say, okay, we're willing and we're interested in doing X, Y, and Z, so that they have the information so that they can execute, and the people of Anguilla can say, okay, this is what they're doing on behalf and for the people of Anguilla.
Yeah, I just would like to just add a little bit too. I was privy to an email between a developer and a local contractor, and I was surprised to know that even though the developer was granted concessions for certain building material, they chose to purchase those building materials from a local contractor. So the local contractor was still involved in the purchasing and the shipping of the material, but still benefiting from the concessions. So there's something still to be gained from a situation like that.
I just want to, add that these are very good ideas, And I think it would be beneficial for you as different youth groups to get together and come up with, a list of these suggestions, because then as government we can look at them and determine which ones are doable and which ones are aspirational that we can get to. I just want to say, in the interest of time, that we have another engagement that was supposed to start at 4 o'clock. So just want to say, we like being with the youth, and certainly, we're running over a little bit, so if you can kind of be cognizant of that, that we do need to get to another appointment. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. At this point, I do believe we will have to just close the questions off there, but how do we feel about being able to receive some of these questions for you guys yourselves to be able to answer in your own time? Maybe I do know that we do see a lot of social media involvement from all of you seated at this panel, and we would be glad to share these questions with you so that you can engage with us from your own social media spaces as well. Is that something that we're open to?
Absolutely. Definitely. I mean, I'm a dinosaur, so I'm not a big social media person. But if you get those questions to us in any form, we will certainly meet and discuss them. Or if you want to get, your representatives, your leaders, and meet with us as cabinet to do that on a separate occasion, we'd be happy to accommodate that.
And I'm always open to discuss the housing aspect, because anything that you want to discuss, whether you can hit me up on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat.
So
all of that is Greek to me.
At this point is where you would have to insert your social media, all your apps. No TikTok, guys. All right.
TikTok.
I realize that nothing came up this afternoon on the constitutional reform, labor, lands. We had quite an interesting conversation about the real estate and reductions in stamp duties. So these are all pertinent issues. Time doesn't permit it, but I'll be happy to engage in another forum on these issues as well. So we're having our constitutional reform meetings continuing on Thursday at the House of Assembly, 6 to 8 p.m. And then the following Thursday, we are hoping to be in Blowing Point in District 6. And then the final week will be over at the Teachers Resource Center. So, young people, we want to hear from you about the Constitution. A lot of the buzzwords are same-sex marriage, our electoral boundaries, whether or not our ex-officio members should be allowed to vote in the House. So there's some very topical issues that we want to hear from the young people about. And I'm happy to engage with you outside of this forum on these issues.
And for our viewing audience in the virtual space, just for their benefit, can you repeat the date and time of the consultation?
Right. So we've done a number already. So we are continuing this Thursday evening over at the House of Assembly at 6 p.m., 6 to 8. It's going to be live via in Anguilla and Government of Anguilla website. The following Thursday, we are going down to District 6. We're hoping to get one of perhaps the church halls down there. And then the last meeting in District 3 will be over at the Rodney MacArthur Ray Auditorium for that final meeting. And the meetings are very interesting. A lot of issues are coming up, but we want to hear some more from our young people on those issues.
Thank you very much. Do we have any closing words from any of our other elected officials?
Particularly on the theme of this year's National Youth Week, I am an advocate for all things blue and green. And I think it's important that we realize the value of forums like this, because we are no longer in a position globally where we can feel satisfied with having these conversations and leaving this confined space and saying, okay, a conversation was had. And I feel good because, I spoke with an elected official, I spoke with my government, and I felt like I was able to articulate what my aspirations are. But as I said in my first response, we are dying. We are dying because of the impact of climate change on our region. And our food, there's droughts resulting in food shortages. There are catastrophic storms resulting in the loss of lives. And what is necessary beyond these conversations is actions. And if we are not willing to advocate on behalf of our futures, we will never see the world, we'll never see the fruit of our labor, because we'll be doing it in a constantly compromised state of being. We will never be able to see economic advancement because we'll be so busy responding to environmental shock. We will never be able to see initiatives come into place in Anguilla until we ourselves take up the mantle. It may sometimes mean confronting a generation past to save the generations to come. And we have to be willing to, this is a real fight, and we have to be willing to stand on the front lines and address climate change head on. Shaping our green and blue economies is much more than pen to paper. It is realistic, actionable options that can create real change, where we will be able to see behavioral changes, social changes, and economic changes, and as well as environmental changes. We have to be able to stop overuse and abuse in its tracks. We have to be confident in our states to respond to reports. We have to be advocates of assessments to ensure that whatever development we do is done in a balanced approach to safeguard our environment. And if we don't act in that way, we will see that everything we did here, everything that we spoke about here today, and everything that we've been speaking about this week would be for naught. There's a phrase, 1.5 to save our lives, where if climate action, if the temperature is not reduced by 1.5 degrees, we will see real catastrophic events in our lifetimes that can lead to mass casualty events. And we have to be mindful that while we, like the Prime Minister of Dominica said, are on the front lines of the war on climate change, our voices are often neglected in spaces when they speak about climate change. And so we have to be intentional about how will we mitigate, but most importantly, how will we respond to climate change in Anguilla? And how do we protect our already deteriorating resources from further deterioration? And so that conversation means, I mean, I've said it like about 6 times in my closing remarks, but that conversation means that we have to be advocates and we have to be willing to act. And I know that the environmental management legislation is one that is very contentious in Anguilla, because the first things people think about is my land, don't touch my land, but it's so much more than that. And so I am begging everybody here, and everybody here with under the sound of my voice, when we do those, we have quite a few natural resource related legislations to bring forward in the next legislative agenda. As I don't know how many of you know that the House was prorogued today, and we look to return sometime in November. But for that legislative cycle, we are looking to bring forward lots of environmental management legislation. So we would need you to attend the consultations to lend your voice, because I don't know how many of you are familiar with the play Hamilton, but history really does have its eyes on us. And we need to be able to look back 50 years from now and say, we were part of the change that led to safeguarding Anguilla in the face of climate change. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we thank you so very much for those very timely words. We do agree. That is the crux of the the reasoning behind today's and yesterday's proceedings with the conversations on the blue and green economy. I'm just going to open the floor for closing remarks from the Honorable Leader of Opposition, and then we will wrap up.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I just want to thank you and the organizing committee for inviting us once again to this youth meeting. It has been a pleasure as usual, and I hope that you continue to have a pleasant and enjoyable week. Thank you.
Thank you once again to our elected officials for taking the time out to come and engage with Anguilla's youth. We want to thank also the PS Social Development and Education for being here with us every step of the way on this conference and staying for straight up conversations. We also want to thank the Department of Youth and Culture, the National Youth Council, representatives of the Anguilla Youth Parliament, as well as our listening and viewing audience in the virtual spaces, and those of you who would have contributed to a successful 2021 National Conference on Youth and Development and the straight up conversations held this afternoon. So for those of you joining us online, thank you very much. For those of you joining us in person, again, thank you for being here, and we are signing off for today. Thank you.
Okay, so based on my very limited knowledge of the blue and green economy, the blue represents fisheries in Anguilla. I think we have a vast amount of fishing land to the north of us, and I think it's very much undiscovered. In terms of agriculture, I think Anguilla in and of itself has a ways to go, as in like we have a lot of options to explore. We can look at housing most of the food that we grow right here in Anguilla with the use of like vertical farms and different agricultural techniques that have been developed around the world. So I think we have an amazing product here, and I think we have to tap into that resource and really to exploit it and bring it to fruition.
It simply means sustaining ocean resources for economic growth, improving livelihood, as well as preserving the health of the ocean. The green economy improves human well-being, such as decreasing environmental pollution, which improves the quality of our air, soil, and water.
Water we have in Anguilla, which is the blue sea, and then this blue sky as usual. It's not always good, but it's good when it's good. Green represents the blue, the nice green trees that we have in Anguilla. It's not bad. I mean, it could be a little better, but you know how it is. Right now we use the sea for fishing, diving, boat racing. I think the sea could use it a lot of things in general. But me personally, I like it how it is.
Focus more on reducing environmental risks and creating sustainable developments while trying to not exhaust our natural resources. Whereas a blue economy would probably follow those same traits, but tend to be focused more on the oceans and their resources, our blue resources.
Going green opens the door to a sustainable, social, environmental, and economic future. However, we can't go green without blue. Our ocean is central to the cycles of life and can be linked to various economic sectors. Globally, the ocean produces up to 80% of our oxygen, and 40% of the world is dependent on marine and coastal biodiversity. Our blue economy promotes the sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth, improve livelihoods and jobs, while preserving the health of marine and coastal ecosystems.
The ocean is a place I can go to escape the realities of the world above, and it's my personal playground. What the ocean means to me is home. It's a place where everyone who lives here should nurture, should try to rebuild and protect.
The ocean plays a big part in Anguillan society as it generates seafood, tourism, shipping, telecommunication, spiritual and cultural support. With such rich history, our blue economy is suffering. Our natural capital is being changed by human threats such as gas emissions, climate change, ocean acidification, marine pollution, rising ocean temperature, agricultural runoff, and untreated sewage.
But I would say right now in Anguilla, our coral reefs aren't as good as they used to be, much like many places around the world. Mainly because of global warming, we're seeing a lot of coral bleaching that's occurring. A lot of our corals are dying off, but also in part with that, we have a lot of fishing that occurs on the reefs. We don't have too many laws or policies in place to protect the reefs.
The Department of Natural Resources Fisheries Unit has actually put together a strategic plan that speaks specifically to our fishers, where we are looking for them to become stewards. We've had actually a number of projects, one of them being in Little Bay, where we've implemented and deployed reef balls and casitas. Now, holistically, the idea is to have our fish population be attracted to these reef balls and casitas. And from that, we can actually have our fishermen developing alternative livelihoods. Alternative livelihoods being sea tours. They can actually take guests out on snorkeling trips. And the whole idea is for them to feel as though they have some responsibility. They can take charge of it, and in doing so, they feel a purpose of protecting that environment.
Over the past 5-6 years, we have encouraged the local fishermen to fish offshore, because much fishermen wasn't fishing offshore. They was just doing lobsters and the reef fish. So now they have gone offshore to fish pelagics, the mahi-mahi and mahi-mahi tunas. So they have now invested in fads where they go to in the ocean and they fish. The Fisher Folks Association has embarked in a project with the Anguilla National Trust and the diving operators, where we are doing marine parks in Anguilla. We have at Sandy Island, Little Bay, and we also have out at Prickle Pier too.
To maintain our pristine environment, consideration must be given to our waste management systems and sustaining marine resources.
In Anguilla, we don't have enough rainfall, so we have to rely on something else. The brackish water, the rain from the earth is not enough. So this is why we get the seawater plant. The seawater plant, it can't dry up. It goes on and on, but it's a very expensive process to keep maintained. We produce about 1 million gallons per day.
Wave energy is gathering energy from ocean waves, specifically the up and down and the side to side and the force of the wave, as opposed to tidal electricity, which has to do with the sea currents, etc. Its principal seeds in small islands with a high coastline to land mass ratio.
We can give value to the resources in the blue and green economy, as it allows for further economic development to benefit people, the planet, and prosperity.
What it takes for jobs to be created is for the people of Anguilla to be entrepreneurs, to be business people. And what it takes for them to be entrepreneurs and business people is money, low interest finances.
While the blue and green economy allows for the generation of revenue, it is not only about gaining profit, as our government must be strategic in their policy making to achieve resilience, efficiency, and sustainability in the ecosystems that surround.
One of the primary repercussions of not enforcing the green and blue economy in Anguilla is the way the international community will regard us as an unsustainable country, not being considerate of our resources, whether it is on land or at sea. But when you think of development, it can be done by process or by action. So what is key is that government takes the initiative to ensure that we lead from the front and we provide framework that considers the economic arguments as well as the sustainable arguments. One of the ways that we have done that in government is the creation of the BANG task force, that is the Blue Anguilla task force. Having it in an action-led process will ensure that we are aware of our resources. We ensure that we have resources available for future generations of Anguillans to benefit from, and we are building in a sustainable way. So when considering the role of government in developing the blue and green economy, government's primary role is to ensure that there's a legislative framework so that the entrepreneurial aspects and environmental aspects will be balanced, as well as education.
It is a no-brainer that our daily lives cannot flourish without the ecosystem services. It is important for the efficiency of systems and sustainability of our resources. We must not only rely on policymakers to bring to fruition the successful transition to the blue-green economy, as this is everybody's responsibility. Business enterprises and individuals are a key transformation pathway to bring about these practices. Let's spread awareness. Let's play our part in sustaining our environment. Let's shape our blue and green economy.
Okay, so based on my very limited knowledge of the blue and green economy, the blue represents fisheries in Anguilla. I think we have a vast amount of fishing land to the north of us, and I think it's very much undiscovered. In terms of agriculture, I think Anguilla in and of itself has a ways to go, as in like we have a lot of options to explore. We can look at housing most of the food that we grow and right here in Anguilla with the use of like vertical farms and different agricultural techniques that have been developed around the world. So I think we have an amazing product here, and I think we have to tap into that resource and really to exploit it and bring it to fruition.
It simply means sustaining ocean resources for economic growth, improving livelihood, as well as preserving the health of the ocean. The green economy improves human well-being, such as decreasing environmental pollution, which improves the quality of our air, soil, and water.
But I think blue means for the tranquility water we have in Anguilla, which is the blue sea, and then this blue sky as usual. It's not always good, but it's good when it's good. Green represents the blue, the nice green trees that we have in Anguilla. It's not bad. I mean, it could be a little better, but you know how it is. Right now we use the sea for fishing, diving, you know, boat racing. I think the sea could use it a lot of things in general. But me personally, I like it how it is.
I believe a green economy tends to focus more on reducing environmental risks and creating sustainable developments while trying to not exhaust our natural resources. Whereas a blue economy would probably follow those same traits, but tend to be focused more on the oceans and their resources, our blue resources.
Okay, so based on my very limited knowledge of the blue and green economy, the blue represents fisheries in Anguilla. I think we have a vast amount of fishing land to the north of us, and I think it's very much undiscovered. In terms of agriculture, I think Anguilla in and of itself has a ways to go, as in like we have a lot of options to explore. We can look at housing most of the food that we grow and right here in Anguilla with the use of like vertical farms and different agricultural techniques that have been developed around the world. So I think we have an amazing product here, and I think we have to tap into that resource and really to exploit it and bring it to fruition.
It simply means sustaining ocean resources for economic growth, improving livelihood, as well as preserving the health of the ocean. The green economy improves human well-being, such as decreasing environmental pollution, which improves the quality of our air, soil, and water.
Well, I think blue means for the tranquility water we have in Anguilla, which is the blue sea, and then this blue sky as usual. It's not always good, but it's good when it's good. Green represents the blue, the nice green trees that we have in Anguilla. It's not bad. I mean, it could be a little better, but you know how it is. Right now we use the sea for fishing, diving, you know, boat racing. I think the sea could use it a lot of things in general. But me personally, I like it how it is.
I believe a green economy tends to focus more on reducing environmental risks and creating sustainable developments while trying to not exhaust our natural resources. Whereas a blue economy would probably follow those same traits, but tend to be focused more on the oceans and their resources, our blue resources.
Okay, so based on my very limited knowledge of the blue and green economy, The blue represents fisheries in Anguilla. I think we have a vast amount of fishing land to the north of us, and I think it's very much undiscovered. In terms of agriculture, I think Anguilla in and of itself has